Amazing. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Changing Face of Mining. Oh, excuse me. We're back for another season. I don't think I ever really closed off the last season, but so we're back with 2025. Super excited to be here with my friends from Keepers of the Circle. As a land acknowledgement, I am trying to be more diverse in my land acknowledgements this year. And so I will do one from where I was raised, which is modern day Cambridge, Ontario, but it's also the traditional lands of the Anishinaabe, Chungongton, I apologize, Haudenosaunee. I practice that one a lot, and my tongue gets very tied on that one. So Chungongton and Haudenosaunee, and that is from Cambridge, Ontario. And today I am with Keepers of the Circle. We will be speaking about some research reporting that they did. And so my land acknowledgements will be is that I learned about GBA plus frameworks being gender-based analysis. We will be talking about culturally relevant GBA plus and the differences there in between and why the distinction should be noted. And that will be part of the show a little bit later. I also just want to say that unfortunately, Femina member and has lost her father, Robert Schultz. And Robert was also a great friend of Femina. He was the founder of MRC Recruiting. A lot of us in North America know Robert, and so our thoughts are with him during this time. And the industry will miss him for sure, and all of his wonderful, wacky, positive energy that he had. So my guests today are from Keepers of the Circle. I will let them introduce themselves, but I met Alex and Hannah through Keepers, where I help on a quarterly basis discussing the mining sector and jobs and related opportunities. They keep on asking me back. The first time I thought I did a terrible job, but apparently I didn't do that bad a job because I keep on coming back. Maybe it's because I am very brutally honest about what's out there and how to approach things in the sector. And so that's who's with us today. And we're going to be talking about the missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls called Action 13.5 and how it can be embedded into the Impact Act Assessment of Canada and many of the intricacies therein. And so, Alex, let's start with you. How about you introduce yourself?
Sure, yeah. So again, my name is Alex Bridges, and I'm dialing in here from the Robinson-Huron Treaty Territory area where our organization locations are in Kirkland Lake in New Liskeard, Ontario. And I'm originally from Timmins region and a member of Mattagami First Nation in Treaty 9 area, but I do live and work in New Liskeard at this time. And as Peggy mentioned, I work for an organization as a project manager, Keepers of the Circle, and we love Peggy, and she helped us over the years on a series of different initiatives that we've done. So happy to be here, and I'll turn it over to my colleague, Hannah.
Yeah, hi everyone. I'm Hannah Skelding, and I'm a policy analyst at Keepers of the Circle. I work remotely, and I'm a settler, and I live in the treaty lands and territories of the Mississaugas of the Credit. And Alex and I have been working on our Sacred Responsibilities report, which is what we're talking about today, for the past year. And yeah, I'm excited to be here. Thanks for having us, Peggy.
Yeah, you're so welcome. So I'm not going to say even about, I introduced some folks for you for the report. And really what got me interested in even just discussing, it was GBA Plus that first brought me to the conversation with you, because Alex, in one of our quarterly opportunities weeks, you talked before me, and I loved hearing your story and the work that you were doing. I was super excited about it, and I wanted to understand more. And then that's when the report came up. So our sacred responsibilities, why don't you go ahead and explain what that is and why it was even brought about?
Sure, yeah. So essentially, since the 2020, when the Impact Assessment Agency started rolling out the new IAA 2019 legislation, there was an inclusion of GBA plus as an added parameter of what would be, assessed in impact assessment. So our interest was really, we come from a high development area, so we applied to do a partnership initiative between an organization called Ananau Katiget Tumingit Regional Inuit Women's Association. I always try to say it the proper way. So it's a Treewa, and it's an Inuit women's organization in Northern Labrador. And our whole initiative was really to try to build Indigenous women's capacity to participate in impact assessments, as well as really try to develop a lens of doing GBA plus that would be respect Indigenous culture and worldviews. And then we had published a different report called Shared Responsibilities back in a couple of years ago, and IAC then approached us to look at how the MMIWG calls for justice 13.5 particularly could be implemented in resource development planning context. So it sent us off on kind of a whole other research perspective. And we had already kind of included the MMIWG research, so we were kind of just well positioned to pick it up. And essentially what we were tasked with was trying to devise impact mitigation strategies that would support or uphold those types of things. So we did all kinds of reviews, which I'm going to kind of leave to Hannah to describe a bit more. So from IAC's perspective, they were meeting sort of this kind of, I would say, coordinated effort to implement the calls for justice across a lot of different federal departments. Mm-hmm. And the Impact Assessment Agency just kind of pegged us to do that. So then from our perspective, we really see that there is evidence of exploitation or violence against marginalized folks in the North. And we're really interested in how, there's ways to address the underrepresentation of Indigenous women in resource development labor force particularly. And we have a long history of offering pre-employment training and skills development training for folks that want to enter into non-traditional trades as an organization. So we offer a program called Culture, Confidence, and Competence, and it's getting women who are, facing barriers to employment into spaces like mining projects and other things like that. So we are very keen to kind of see how, from more of a policy perspective, what could we be contributing to based on the cumulative knowledge that we've kind of come to know over the years as well. So in a nutshell, that's kind of how we ended up doing this.
I think that's one of the things that drew me to speaking with you about it the first time, was coming from mining, understanding that mining obviously has operations that are extremely remote. One road in, one road out, if there's a road in, if there's a road out. And also in a former life, being tangentially associated with the Ring of Fire and the community's concerns about missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls. And what were some of the, at that point, what were some of the solutions that my organization, along with the partner consultants, how they were exploring solutions around that. And so I think we often hear, I don't want to say often hear, we hear about these stories. And for me, what the report did when I was reading through it was put faces to the stories, right? Where it's not anymore just a rumor mill or, something you might hear on a showroom floor, but it was real stories that called out mining in particular. Mm-hmm. Hannah, so Alex said you were going to be left to discuss some of the reports, so why don't you tell us how you got involved with that?
Yeah, I guess how I got involved is I started at Keepers a year ago and started as an analyst on this project. So I've been involved since we started it, really. And yeah, but I wasn't involved in the shared responsibilities report that Keepers has previously published. So I learned a lot from Alex. But yeah, I mean, it's been good. I feel like what you said, Peggy, something that we really wanted to highlight was the quotes from the participants that we had in the project to make sure that the stories were being told in a good way. And so there are direct quotes from our participants throughout it, but they're obviously confidential. There's no identifying features. But yeah, I can talk a little bit about the process of how we did our research.
Please, that would be great.
Yeah, so like Alex said, it was funded by the Impact Assessment Agency through a knowledge synthesis grant. And we did the research in 2 phases. So the first phase was we conducted a desktop review of all the previous literature in the space. And we also conducted focus groups and interviews with Indigenous women and gender diverse people who were connected to development projects. So some of them worked on site, some of them have loved ones who work on site, some are just in a community connected to a project. And then in phase 2, we conducted a SWOT analysis for all of the mitigation measures that we found. And then we conducted secondary engagements with our participants and also with anyone interested in our project. So community members, experts, academics, and just we wanted to do that secondary engagement to make sure, again, that we were telling the stories in a good way and we were representing what we were hearing well. And then we also developed a mitigation framework and evaluation tool in phase 2. And in total, we did 5 focus groups and 8 semi-structured interviews. And our participants were from Northern Ontario, Northern Labrador, and Alberta. Okay. And we had First Nation, Métis, and Inuit participants. And also some participants who identified as Two-Spirit. So, yeah.
Okay. Yeah, that's amazing. That would have been a lot of work to collect the names and develop the interviews and ensure it was done. I can imagine it brings up, it can open the doors for a lot of challenging feelings, various, whether it's re-traumatizing or what have you. But when you relive stories, as many of us do, that are traumatizing to yourself, having to discuss it into can go one of 2 ways, right? As far as finding it healing or finding it not healing. And so there's a lot of sensitivity around how do you approach these stories in a way that's authentic to the person.
Yeah, we were really conscious of that, particularly when we had some questions that were related to experiences of harassment or other incidents on site. And the way we tried to navigate that is to create a space that was really confidential, welcoming. It was a calm environment, and we really stuck to more process or sort of what happened to deal with the issue versus sort of retelling like in graphic detail, like, negative things that have happened. So we really felt like it was pretty much positively received. We really didn't have any people that really got too upset. And I feel like everybody thought it was really meaningful. So thankfully, but we were, we had an elder present. We were really conscious about making sure that, people knew the procedures very well and that they could stop at any time or anything like that. So that's overall, I would say, yeah, it went quite well. Like, it was very positively received. And actually, we would have loved to keep going, but we were kind of running out of time. So it was just like more people were popping up. We were like, we have to like go over this data. But yeah, it was really good.
Amazing. Well, amazing that you were able to provide that safe space and especially if you're not traveling, right? So if you're doing it over a screen like we're talking today, that can be a challenge too. So. So tell me a little bit about the Indigenous feminist lens, because when I read that in the report, I got excited and immediately thought, well, that has to go into the title. I think that's such an essential term, complicated term. So tell me, how does that figure into the report and what it is that you did?
Yeah, so essentially when we say applying a Indigenous feminist lens, we were really taking a strong consideration of storytelling or knowledge transference. And in doing primary research, we took that seriously in that we really wanted the participants to be guiding where we were headed with the research and the topics available. So though we started with sort of the lit review and we understood sort of where, we wanted to go with it, we actually kind of switched gears partway through. So you can see in our, like, if anybody's reading the report, you can see in our method section, we came up with a secondary interview series so that we made sure that we were kind of creating that distinctions in the way that we were interviewing folks. And storytelling is such an important kind of component, and it really helped us to do, I think, a really good qualitative coding analysis and really try to pursue different pathways that were coming up. So I would say in that sense, we were really trying to stick to the felt knowledge kind of component, or what you would say where women speak from the heart. They speak from their previous experiences, and like in a shared environment where it's typically, just women or just gender diverse folks. It was very intimate. There wasn't sort of like this need to sort of publicly bury yourself in front of a big group of people or anything. So we really tried to be as respectful and kind of considerate as possible. And as well, really try to incorporate different grassroots publications, and not just scholarly literature, but really looking at what are Indigenous women's organizations saying, what are activists kind of publishing about these types of topics, because there's already a lot of different kind of coverage on a range of different issues related to resource development. So that's how we tried to sort of honor the feminist perspective in that way.
Yeah. Hannah, were there any in particular, any feminist literature that stood out to you during this time, or all of it?
Yeah, all of it. I did my master's in environmental sociology, and I focused a lot on Indigenous feminism in that as well. So I think that really influenced my perspective on things too. I love Robin Bourgeois from Brock U. I feel like she's amazing. She has really cool perspectives on mining and Indigenous histories and violence against Indigenous women. Yeah, and then I think something that was important to me was what Alex had mentioned earlier, was emphasizing that storytelling is knowledge and storytelling is power. And I read the Indigenous Methodologies book by Margaret Kovach, and that was something that I really took from it, is that it's so important to share stories in a way that's accurate to the person that's telling it, and also make sure that it's authentic to them. So that's why you see those quotes throughout our report, is just how important storytelling is.
I think the one thing is this is slightly off topic, but when I was starting to work more so with some of the consultants in social performance, as it was called, where I was, it was really around the importance of traditional knowledge and how it is shared through storytelling. And it is the validity of that knowledge as well, not just it's how we look upon it as, in colonial practices, as lesser than, where it's as valid as, or more valid than even, and how can we create those pathways to learn from each other and not to discard the knowledge because it is transferred in a different way. That knowledge transfer is different, not lesser than. And there's a former, there's a woman, a former colleague of mine, she's since moved firms, and she was really instrumental in me learning about that, because this is one of the areas where she spends a lot of her time in consulting. And but that to me was really key to my own learning and my own dismantling of all of this stuff, is that knowledge transfer can come in many different ways, and it has to be authentic to the person that's transferring the knowledge and to the person that's receiving as well.
Agreed.
So tell me a little bit about the difference. So I know GBA Plus as GBA Plus, gender-based analysis. You go to the Government of Canada's website, you do the course, you look at the data. My focus, my desire was always to use it internally to the organization, whereas in IAC it is used externally to the organization, where you're using it in a community-based environment. But I believe in a lot of ways it can be used internally to understand your workforce and the application of data and qualitative, quantitative, etc., to building more inclusive spaces. So tell me how that would differ from culturally relevant GBA Plus analysis.
So GBA Plus is really that analytical tool, like you said, that really considers different intersectional factors in project planning, and it really has super broad applications in a lot of different type of environments. The culturally relevant component of GBA Plus is really to distinguish the Indigenous specific analysis by considering, Indigenous worldviews regarding two-spirited peoples and the non-gender binary considerations of the way. So male and female is really sort of a more of a fluid kind of idea or precept in Indigenous culture. And there are specific lived realities that are facing Indigenous folks with colonization of Indigenous folks as well. So it's just to create that distinction where you're not only incorporating Indigenous worldviews and values and processes and ways of communication, but also to show that respect, that there is, a legacy of assimilationist policies, there are different cultural kind of expectations, and that there's distinctions between that specific subgroup and other subgroups as well. So there's kind of this uptick, and it was originally coined by the Native Women's Association of Canada, the CRGBA Plus model. And it was really just to kind of acknowledge that distinction for folks, so that it wasn't just lumped into sort of the wider kind of rights or women's rights narrative that often is kind of attributed to GBA Plus. So even though that's not exactly correct, because it really is an analytical tool, but anyways, it's just some of the kind of easy low-hanging fruit. When we say gender-based analysis, people automatically think, women's rights or women's equality, but it's really more, I think, nuanced than that. And for the purpose of our research, the way that we really looked at it is trying to use CRGBA Plus within both internal and external development planning processes to devise mitigation strategies that would address different intersecting inequalities and lived realities of folks we were meeting with. So in our criteria, there were a few different categories in the way that we were communicating with folks. So it was people that either had industry experience, they were either part of community negotiations or consultations and agreements as like a staff member or a counselor for their community, or there would be Indigenous women or gender diverse people that were living in close proximity to a project in a town that was, heavily centric, or their economic kind of driver was like a boom town kind of say. Yeah. And then there were folks that actually had or were actively or had recently worked in industry specifically, and they were employees either current or previous in the past. So there was, this immediate need to kind of see how different mitigation strategies would affect different subgroups differently. And so, a lot of the literature in GBA Plus or accommodations and services and mitigation strategies for Indigenous folks generally is highly centric around on-site services and supports and on-site kind of applications. So as soon as you get to sort of the project edge, things start to drop off like really easily and quickly. So it's very difficult to collect data on what is happening in the regional project area. So for example, if you take a look at the city of Timmins, there's a lot of different projects that are historic and current happening around there, but there's really not a lot of data to show what is happening in the city of Timmins or in the surrounding areas. So just as an example, Sudbury is the same thing. And obviously, Kirkland Lake, which is where our headquarters is for our group, is in the same situation. So we really kind of took that picture approach of, what's happening to folks that are just being affected by all of the environmental kind of concerns or considerations, and how is it sort of, being considered in these wider processes. So, and I would say too that, when you're talking about, it's really going beyond GBA Plus as like sort of, we know that this could have a specific impact on communities, when really what we're interested in, and as researchers, we're interested in the action part of it. So, the information we can kind of see based on historic trends and what can be expected. So usually there's increased, pressures on infrastructure and services, housing concerns, they're well known. And so for us, what we're interested in is trying to figure out, okay, so what are the practical applications and mitigation options to do this? So we looked at different kind of gaps in data, or like what was creating sort of these intersectional inequalities that were emerging from development practices. And that's sort of how we leveraged CRGBA Plus in our research. We sort of used it as a lens to measure what we were doing.
That's interesting. Oh, sorry, go ahead, Anna.
Sorry, I was just going to add that we wanted the mitigation measures in our report to be able to be implemented. We wanted community developers, government, like anyone, to be able to see how certain mitigation measures could be implemented in their case. So yeah, we wanted it to be really applicable that way.
I think that's one of the things that in conference I'm in conference season right now, so I'm evaluating all my conferences. One of the things that we find in conferences is there's always one nation in particular from out in BC that often speaks about successes, and they're very resource sensitive and all that other stuff. And what I've realized is that resource development really likes plug and play solutions. And when solutions aren't plug and play, well, it worked here, so it's got to work there. And that's not the case, because nations are changeable, communities are changeable, people are changeable, and what works in one place will not work in another place. And so it's a matter of like, sorry, this question just popped into my head, but how do you make recommendations accessible, understanding that people are changeable? Does that make sense?
Yeah, so essentially what we did was we designed a couple different kind of figures within the report that is more kind of like a checklist or sort of an overview of what could potentially exist. So we did like a very short summary, just going over essentially in categorical kind of ways, different ideas that could exist. So there's sort of this element too, and I want to talk about this, that there's really big gaps in the way that disaggregated data is collected. So there's two things that are altering. Number one, it is community, implementation strategies, what their priorities are and how they want to determine their own solutions and kind of initiatives. So that's the first priority. But then also too, there is kind of like this proof gap that's occurring where there is these gaps in baseline data, and because of the need to attribute mitigation strategies within an impact assessment, there needs to be those direct linkages, like A is plus B leads to C, and like it's very concrete, kind of mechanistic in the way that they think. So there's kind of this confusion that's occurring around different party responsibilities, who's ultimately responsible for the impacts of large-scale resource developments, especially legacy impacts over a long period of time, and cumulative impacts are very difficult to kind of narrow down and be like, this project is going to lead to this subsequent kind of future issue. So it's a very complex and difficult assessment process for communities that, are leading to a lot of, I think, confusion around the application or relevancy of GBA plus, CRGBA plus in community as well as with developers. So I think there's this kind of a concern from, a development perspective of, the more we uncover, the more data that's going to be the more responsibility that we as developers have to undertake and address over a period of time. And, from us and a policy kind of analysis standpoint, we really see it more as an opportunity to contribute to baseline data gaps that are in existence. So these studies could actually be leading communities to pursue, alternative funding opportunities, to, justify programs and services, or lead to kind of a collaborative initiative approach. Or really, I mean, if we come down to it, if there is opportunities for proponents to contribute, then, they really need to be doing that.
Yeah, that disaggregation of data, I was working on trying to get a case study off the ground, with a producer south of the border, and it was around like, what are we allowed to, mine was internal, again, like a human resources function. What are you allowed to ask talent? What aren't you allowed to ask talent? What is talent willing to volunteer? And if not willing to volunteer, what is that indicative of, right? So there's obviously the trust, the mistrust, what will be used with the data, how am I safe if if it does get out that I'm a trans person or two-spirit, am I safe as a person if I am proactively giving that information within the organization, within the community? Because there's places certainly where you're not safe, whether it's in Canada, jurisdictions where it's still illegal to be LGBTQA2S. I'm missing all of the initials, but there's a safety aspect there as well. And so that was that disaggregation, like how far can we go drill into the data past, I'm a white person living in Ontario making X amount of money. You can only go so far, but the other ones, these unseen intersectionalities, or these intersectionalities that aren't captured, can have massive impact on solutions that are developed. And that's a really big, that is a very big challenge. So a question, I'll put this out to Hannah. A question is we were talking before the show about, the feminist vision of mining, where it's about inclusion, not exclusion. where we continue to build equity, not remove people who have traditionally had the most privilege. How would this, if we continue to build a feminist mining vision, does that desegregation become easier to address? Hopefully, because we're going to be more trusted. Like, so in theory.
Yeah, I feel like it's a hard one to answer.
Yeah.
Yeah, something that we were kind of discussing a lot is that when you implement culturally relevant GBA plus, or you're implementing these culturally safe spaces on site or anything like that, you're improving your diversity, equity, inclusion targets as a company. So, you know, it does work to improve that over time. It's not something that's going to be a quick fix, for sure. Like changing like the culture of a workplace is not, putting in one rec room where people are able to smudge is not going to, you know, improve things overnight, but it does help. Like, it's all these small steps that are able to help. Yeah, I don't know if that answered your question.
No, I think that is a really challenging question, because I'm sure we could do like 3 episodes just on that, is because because feminism, a feminist vision of mining is great in its theory, but how is it even implemented, right? And how does that create trust within the communities, or trust within the industry, or trust anywhere? Is that and because it really does come down to trust and transparency. And just in thinking about some people I know who have taken over projects with legacy issues of trust, and how it's so, I don't want to say impossible. I don't like to think that anything's impossible, but it's still such a struggle to build a trust, even though like my heart might be in the right place, and I might, you know, be doing everything right. The community and the nation has this history that they draw upon that is valid and true and honest, and why should they believe that this new person is any different from the last? The last 5 were the same. So
yeah, and the sad thing is that we did kind of run across a lot of apathy about the level of change that really could be achieved by trying to pursue initiatives like this, because really there is sort of this longer history of, you know, a lot of violent incidents, or, you know, abuses that happen on and off site, and proponents can really only do so much to control, you know, the workforce and whatever, but we're really not looking at it from a systems approach like we could be. But now things are changing. I feel like, you know, there's different kind of major, I think, industry players that are starting to take a hard look at themselves and like the industry as a whole. And we saw some really kind of interesting reports coming out that helped us to guide sort of what expectations that we really could, you know, think of from a proponent's perspective. And we heard a little bit too from proponents. We tried to reach out to them as well to kind of get their perspectives on, you know, if we were on the right track, or what they could see as sort of limitations or opportunities for impact mitigation as well. And I think there's a lot of harm to undo, but I think that just makes what we're trying to kind of promote that much more necessary, to really kind of, even though GBA Plus does have its limitations for, I think, Indigenous perspectives and community applications, it still is better than nothing, or what was there before, which was basically, you know, that's like, it is what it is. So I do think that we have made progress. It's just, we got to speed it up. We have to kind of like really promote the available instruments and resources that are out there now, because I think too, like, the legislation is so new. A lot of people really don't know about the changes, you know, as they are. So the opportunities to sort of promote more instrumentation, more guidance, and for communities as well, because they do experience capacity issues, all the better. And we've promoted that to IAC as well when we presented to them, because it's something we really noticed that is needed. Like, people need to get that information like soon, right away, like updates.
I think that's a really big part, is that research projects like these are for, as far as implementation strategies, are so essential. So how do we get to that implementation? How do we internalize the recommendations or the strategies to not take 10 years, because we don't have 10 years. Like
Exactly.
We just don't. So, and so let's talk a little bit about the strategies. We talked about CR culture relevant GBA plus. For whatever reason, I find that easier to say than the actual acronym. So what about there's gender transformative changes around shifting the norms and policies and practices. So how can you do what are some actions in that can address the root causes of gender equity and equality?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think the biggest takeaway for the gender transformative change component is really that there needs to be a cultural shift in the way that we think about GBA plus. And so it's not just a woman's issue, it's not just those things, but that also too, some of the issues are so systemic and so kind of deeply entrenched into our processes that, you know, it's not like a proponent can't resolve it like by themselves. So it really creates sort of like this all hands on deck advocacy kind of perspective where everybody's working together to make effective change. And so we kind of kept that in mind. And, you know, when we talk about different mitigation measures, we have a whole kind of laundry list of what came up, but really too, there is a lot of different stories. And I think that it would be interesting to let Hannah kind of describe a little bit about what we heard first, because it'll contextualize a bit why we had brought together the information like we did, because yeah, it was just so interesting hearing the ways in which you know, conflict or like other types of kind of daily you know, occurrences were happening. So maybe I'll get Hannah to like context that a bit.
Please, Hannah, go ahead.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so obviously the first thing we heard from our participants was that sexual harassment and violence is real. It happens on site. It happens in communities that are in close proximity to resource development projects. And it is a huge barrier for recruitment and retention of Indigenous women and gender diverse people in industry and in those spaces. So yeah, just starting it off with that. What was interesting was that many of our participants expressed that there was a big difference between employment with the developer directly and employment with a small and medium enterprise, like a contracted company.
I am interested in that one because one of my personal big interests is cleaning up supply chain. Because you can do as much as you can around a proponent, being a proponent, if you don't have really deep procurement strategies, you'd really, you know, I think it's for everyone, at least in Australia, for every one mine employee, you have 20 contractors. And how does a proponent keep that in check? Right?
We noticed that right away. Yeah, there was
you really can't. But no, so yeah, sorry.
We go into procurement a lot in the report because we just saw it so often that, you know, one woman would be working for a catering company on the same site as someone who's working for the developer, and they would have drastically different experiences, especially when reporting grievances. So yeah, and then beyond that, just grievance reporting was, most of the time it was very unclear. It was not safe. It wasn't held with confidence. So one woman actually said that the first time she experienced harassment and violence on site, she did report, and the next time she came to site, everyone knew about it, and her experience on site became significantly worse. So when an incident happened again, she just chose not to report because it actually put her job in jeopardy. Yeah. So yeah, we heard that many times, that it just was not safe to report. Reporting systems were not culturally safe. Yeah, and then, yeah, sorry, I'm just trying to see if I missed anything, but those were the main takeaways. And also this idea that you don't want to speak up about it when it happens, because it does put your job at risk. A lot of people had a fear of being reprimanded for bringing it up, or they felt like they were getting pushed out of their job after they did report, that it wasn't actually addressed, that the perpetrator was never dealt with, Things just happen as a status quo afterwards, and that was a really common theme across all participants.
Well, too, and we heard some stories about how for the contractors, they actually discouraged their staff from reporting incidents because it would reflect poorly on their performance reviews.
Yeah.
And so they just would be like, hey, if it's like not harming them, to the point of it being extreme, then it was just swept under the rug. So many instances of that. And two, we just wanted to highlight too that certain First Nations that are more highly impacted and closer to development projects typically are entering into IBA agreements, impacted benefit agreements, and that's also creating differences in treatment between, urbanized non-IBA holders that are coming to work in a different community. So Kirkland Lake is a great example of that. There's many surrounding, First Nations communities that typically would, hold an IBA, and their agreements are protecting the staff members to a certain degree. They have reporting channels and they have certain agreements that are in place. But for folks that are living, like, say, coming down from like the far north, at Wapscat region, or, those other kind of communities, they're not really getting the chances to even get in the door. Or if they are, then they're experiencing, like, I just use Wapscat loosely, but I'm just saying that because it's the first community I thought of. But a lot of folks are coming from other communities and living in urban areas, like, the historic mining towns, and they're not really getting the same level of services or treatment or even liaison services. So it just shows that there's a complication of types of issues when we're talking about equity deserving groups. Who is that really? And is it Indigenous women? Is it gender diverse folks? Is it IBA holders? Is it, should kind of those play a factor in the way that processes or policies are effectively implemented in development operations? And it just shows that, there's kind of this disparity of practices that are applied to a range of demographics, and that a lot of the mitigation strategies that are proposed really highly benefit a range of different folks. It's like settler folks, immigrant women. There's a lot of different opportunities to sort of create positive change for everybody. And it's just, in the context of impact mitigation under MMIWG, it has so many kind of different positive applications and a variety of kind of aspects. So.
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things there that I could really take away. The first one is being, what's good for one group of people is typically good for the workforce, right? So whether it's flexible work strategies, better childcare, more accessible childcare, like whatever that is, healthcare with different modalities. So whether that is, ceremony versus traditional, or not traditional, ceremony versus like settler therapy. There's all kinds of different ways that it really does positively impact the workforce. I think as far as the income disparity, I noted this a lot more in Timmins than in Sudbury. The first time I went up to Sudbury, I'm such a dumb Southerner. I was like, oh my gosh, look at I'm on the move to Sudbury because I love it up there. I think it's beautiful. Stable jobs for people who look like me. All that other good stuff. And it's a beautiful town, but you see it especially in Timmins, where you have this incredibly wide disparity in income, where you have beautiful homes worth millions of dollars because you have global companies there, but then there is also a lot of poverty on the other side. And so how does the access to economic support and benefits, how is that being translated directly on the ground, as you were saying, in the community, and is it that's interesting. I do want to, there's a couple of quotes that I pulled from it, the report. And so the one is, it's a mining camp, it's a man's camp, it's male dominated, male dominated in the trades. Indigenous women are getting SHIT on, is one. And the other one is, every woman we interviewed who had worked in the industry reported instances of workplace harassment and discrimination. And I think when I look back at my own friend group, more often than not, we have experienced workplace harassment and discrimination as well. And it's bringing this, and it's obviously a very big theme in the industry right now with what we saw with BHP and Rio Tinto right before the Christmas break, as far as their lawsuits. So it's obviously swept under the rug. And it's the impact to that on from a mental health piece for the survivors is so strong. And then it's just, I guess that's when you do get into the strategies that that I was early jumping to.
Yeah.
So are you still good for time?
Oh yeah.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
So as far as some of these strategies and fitting them within IAC too, because that's really what it's all about. Maybe I'll just point us to early engagement, because that is such an incredibly common theme in the industry, but we still hear that engagement doesn't happen early enough. So from the time you get a claim or you buy a project, before you even buy a project, you should be engaging with the community. What did you learn around that one?
Yeah, we do see that from what we've heard from folks that are working in staff work council, that there is early engagement that's occurring. I don't think it's to the level that, there's a lot of like in person and, whatever reasoning they have for that, but there is early notices going out too. And I think the agency is really pushing hard for proponents to kind of, as soon as they know that they have something, they're really trying to at least establish like an initial relationship with the communities. And that being said, I don't really see a breakdown of the way that consultation parameters were done in community. So for example, it would be really helpful to understand sort of at least confidentially showing some demographic, like percentage of women that were, took place over all the consulted folks, or different things like that would really help to show that there is equity being achieved in consultation processes, and they leave that to communities to deal with internally. So we really don't see a lot of public facing information about the way that information is collected, and it's more based on that kind of internal relationship. And then I do feel like to a certain degree, there is learning opportunities that are being missed within impact assessment because of that. We really have a lot of stories from women saying, hey, I'm not included when, our communities are doing consultations, or I'm not sure what's really going on. I'm not getting notices fast enough, or those types of comments. But, is that every woman's experience? I don't think so. It's just depending on, different community readiness opportunities and the way that, the staffing opportunities and other things. So, and I think COVID really affected that too. So now that's kind of, we're sort of coming into this new age now where like the new legislation's there, everything's lifted now. So we're kind of seeing like an emergence of, different practices coming in. But I have seen positive evidence of the agency taking more of a leadership role as well, like doing community visits, actually trying to be there in person and respecting what communities are asking for, which is face-to-face, more than anything. So for consultation and engagement overall, as part of our MMIWG report, I think the overall kind of takeaway that we had was that there is still a level of exclusionary pattern to a degree about land use decisions and sort of that stewardship opportunities, but overall that, it's more about interpersonal limitations that are preventing women from really trying to join the labor force, or they know the risks associated with being in a male dominated environment, and some of them just flat out refuse to be there. But honestly, childcare was the single most, it's extreme. And, if you look at the demographics of Indigenous folks in Canada, like we have some of the youngest kind of generation, and like we have a lot of kids. So a lot of women it's not even a possibility, there's no overnight care. Or like the folks that we're having, they had to like switch kind of shifts with their friends to try to get overnight care, or they had a nanny, which was creating an extreme expense for them. So a lot of different kind of alternative care situations that, when we're talking about GBA plus and intersectional analysis, I think that was like the biggest takeaway from our report, is that like northern communities have like very limited childcare already, and our childcare staff are underpaid and undervalued, I think, overall. And there's really not enough alternative care or overnight care situations. So rotational work is highly incompatible with family dynamics. And, it's typically Indigenous women end up kind of holding down the fort. They take care of the kids and they don't get respite, while their husbands or their partners are gone off to work in the mines, and then they have to hold it all down or whatever. So even on our own staff, we have folks that are carrying the burden of trying to take care and manage everything, and that they could not even, imagine participating, even though they know, it's good money, there's good opportunities, their community might even have agreements, but they can't access that. It's not a reality.
Yeah. And if you don't have family support,
yes,
what do you do? And we actually heard a story about two women who took different rotations on their schedule and traded off, and they would watch each other's children when they were off. Like, that's what people are kind of resorting to, and it's not adequate.
Mm-hmm.
That's so
Or
hard.
like
because,
grandparents.
Yeah. Well, like grandparents,
Which is hard for them. They're elders, they're getting older. Like we've heard a lot of people, that's tiring. It's very tiring taking care of kids. And the more there are, it's difficult.
Yeah. I often say I'm going to be a great grandparent because I'm going to love the fact that I just get to like hang out with the kids, but I'm not going to do it like all the time. But yeah, like the whole switch, like, because it's so hard when if you are trading with another mom, and what happens to the kid? Like if something happens to the kid and you can't get a hold of the bio mom, and the surrogate mom is like has no parenting authority, like how does that work too, right? Like I remember having a baby and me thinking, how do like people that shift work do this? And I live in a southern community with lots of childcare, and I'm like, it's not like we have like, so I can't even imagine trying to do that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, that's what a lot of folks told us too. That like it's not even on the table. They can't do it because of that.
And like some moms said that they just had to leave during their shift if something drastic came up with their child, and there was no understanding or anything around that.
Or they would receive a warning for interrupting their shift or things like that. So it's really just shows that. And though we did hear positive stories too, where some people were having family emergencies. Yeah. So a positive story was that on some sites, we really heard that they were like, they were given leave to take off. If they were experiencing a personal emergency, automatically they were granted a few days leave. And they were actually written right into their contracts that they could take up to a certain period of time to deal with, interpersonal issues or family matters or issues of domestic violence or things like that. So you can kind of see employers, it depends on where you are geographically and like what company, but there have been or even to another positive example. And overall, every story we heard was good, was that I think a lot of developers are recognizing that there's a lot of people in recovery or that they have substance abuse. They're trying to recover from substance abuse and addictions. And so it's not really trying to be punitive, but more kind of like rehabilitation. So they would allow folks to go get treatment and come back and save their job for them when they were ready to go. There was one story of a woman who approached, her supervisor and just said, hey, I'm having sort of like a crisis right now. I need to sort of get help and, get assistance with that. And they were right away supported her to kind of go and do that. And as soon as she felt, ready to work again, then she was allowed back on the job and everything. So it's really kind of an easy situation. And she was able to navigate that successfully and keep her job. So there are, I think, overall, a lot of good kind of anecdotal examples, but it's always siloed. Like what we noticed would be like one area would be like really terrible, and then another area would be like kind of awesome, and you don't really see that systems or like kind of industry type of approach to issues. It's more like whatever the company wants to do, basically.
Yeah, the more holistic view of it, or even I guess that's really where we need to get to, right? There's a lot of guidance out there, like we said. There's tons of guidance out there. What you've done as a research report is fantastic, and especially giving around strategies. So now it's a matter of putting rubber to the road. I could keep on going, but I am going to stop us there. And of course, I would love to have you back in in a bit. But one of my questions, I don't mind the dogs. Before we go, one last question is, what was the most significant learning from doing this work that both of you experienced?
Wow, I learned so much during this. It's hard to kind of.
I know. I felt like we were learning like every day something new, as like throughout the research and also when we were writing. Yeah.
For me, I think just personally, because I The area where I'm from is like has a lot of impact and benefit agreements, negotiated. If you look at Ontario, we're a highly developed area. And I'm now, as a researcher, I'm pursuing avenues related to that. So what I'm interested in future research opportunities for me, I would love to do impact characterization, where there is kind of this articulation, what should be contained within an impact assessment, what should be contained within an IBA, and sort of that differential kind of component, because they blend. They're merging together and covering similar issues, or even, what could arguably be within a provincial or federal responsibility to be undertaking. So that's my interest now. For the next step for me is like, okay, let's tackle this, because it came up so much where it's like, this should be like, when we talk about impact mitigation, that's firmly rested within IA, but it could easily be perceived or advocated as a benefit too. So there's not really clear guidance in that regard. And I think it's leading to also confusions about application as well, or the benefits of GBA plus. And I think having sort of those instruments that can really give you that clear kind of like, this is where these things should be placed would be beneficial. So I'm hoping to maybe do that in future, but we'll see.
I love that.
That's actually the same as me, Alex. I think seeing how IBAs impact experiences of workers on site, and like only IBA holders benefit from that, was an eye-opener. And when Alex and I were talking about it, like this distinction between mitigation, like what is a mitigation and what is a benefit, that's something that was kind of like, it kind of blew my mind, like, oh yeah, that's really interesting to think about, like what should be in an IBA and what should be a mitigation measure that influences the entire organization, So yeah, that's also my big takeaway and where I want to focus in the future as well.
I get so excited. You are both younger than me, and there's a few of my friends who are younger than me. And I can just say that I get so excited when I talk to young women about this stuff, because it's just so clear in what you want to learn about and how you want to do it, and you just own these things. Like, this is not the experience of the Gen Xer. It's kind of like, go to job, make money, retire, do everything right, and every time your boss tells you to do something, you just take on more. And I admire the younger generation. I feel like there's just, or younger women in this industry and doing this work, because I feel like there's just so much that we can learn from you. So I appreciate your time and coming on, and I hope to have you back sometime, maybe in the spring. We can talk about other projects, if you can, that you have going on, because you did great work, and it's so sorely needed, and you're well placed geographically and with experience to be doing really great work. So thank you very much for the hard work that you do behind these projects. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Peggy, and thank you for having us here. It was fun sharing. I always love talking about this. My favorite topic. So thank you.
I love it. Thanks everyone for joining us today. The next episode is still up in production, but we'll let you know as soon as that gets done. It will be after Roundup, which is next week. If you are at Roundup, please come by. See, Beth and I, we're going to be having coffee at 1 p.m. Eastern time in the coffee shop that's in the convention center, and we'd love to meet you all. So have a great week.